In a race that is too close to call, Joe Biden and Donald Trump pulling out all the stops, trying to flip each other's supporters. Trump venturing into the South Bronx on Thursday, reaching out to Black and Hispanic voters in a very deep blue district. The former president trying to make the case that he's their best hope for change.
African Americans are getting slaughtered. Hispanic Americans are getting slaughtered. And these millions and millions of people that are coming into our country, the biggest impact and the biggest negative impact is against our Black population and our Hispanic population, who are losing their jobs, losing their housing, losing everything they can lose.
Now, President Biden has his own strategy to win over different voters, with Nikki Haley declaring she plans to vote for Trump. The Biden campaign seeing an opportunity to try to pick off some of her supporters who may be never Trumpers, releasing this statement with the headline, "To Haley voters, there is a home for you," on Team Biden-Harris. The message goes on to say, quote, "While Trump has done absolutely nothing to gain the support of Haley voters and takes them for granted, Biden and his campaign are actively reaching out to build a coalition of Republicans, and they know they need to earn their vote." Let's bring in Dave Leventhal, editor-in-chief of Raw Story, Shermichael Singleton, former deputy chief of staff at HUD in the Trump administration, and Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Happy Friday. Dave, let's start first with you. We saw former President Donald Trump going into the Bronx yesterday to try to win over Hispanic and Black voters. This is a district he lost by 68 points to Biden in 2020. Now, it has trended more red, but it's still all relative, right? 68 points is not nothing. Is this the right place for that message? Should he not be in, like, Detroit?
Well, you know, Donald Trump winning New York, which he said he was going to do during the speech. I mean, Joe Biden probably has a better chance of winning Alabama than Donald Trump has winning New York, but that's not the point here. Where is Donald Trump's trial happening?
Right.
It's happening in Manhattan. What is Donald Trump trying to telegraph right now? That he is a candidate who can bring in African-American voters, Hispanic voters, who are disaffected and disillusioned with the policies of the Biden administration. Now, that might not be a whole lot when it comes down to it, if we're looking at just sheer voters, but in states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, some of the key swing states that are going to make the difference between whether Joe Biden or Donald Trump becomes the next president, you're going to have tens of thousands, if not thousands of votes be the difference in the margin in those states. Those are two reasons why Donald Trump is doing what he did last night.
Right. It's going to be in those states. It's going to be like, where can you pick off from the other side and get them to come to your side? Shermichael, we heard in the clip leading into this Donald Trump's pitch to voters there. Yeah. I couldn't tell. It looked like the hands were both enthusiastic and then there were thumbs down. So it looked like a mixed reaction from that crowd, best I could tell. I want to play a clip from him in 2024 making his pitch. Here's what he said.
I got indicted a second time and a third time and a fourth time. And a lot of people said that that's why the Black people like me, because they have been hurt so badly and discriminated against. And they actually viewed me as I'm being discriminated against. The mugshot, we've all seen the mugshot. And you know who embraced it more than anybody else? The Black population. It's incredible. You see Black people walking around with my mugshot.
So is his pitch effective to members of the black voting population? Yeah.
Is not, but the pitch in New York is. And I actually spoke with some folks on his team after that, and I just sort of gave them my thoughts on, hey, you guys do have somewhat of an opportunity here. We are seeing a sort of working class realignment, specifically among men of color more so than women.
And young men.
And young men. And so if you want to make those appeals, you need to talk about things like economics, economic opportunity. And what you're sort of seeing now, you're seeing the former president attempt to make that pivot. I think it's smart. I think it's wise. To the point that was made, this race is going to be won on the margins. And I don't think either candidate, Democrat or Republican, should be so presumptive about any group of people to just assume, based on their race, that they're going to vote one way or the other. The Republican Party, after the Growth and Opportunity Project in 2012, said, we're going to reach out to communities of color. I contributed to that. And the party failed in that effort. Here comes Donald Trump, of all people, actually attempting to make that effort. And I would encourage him to continue forward, because every group should have any candidate running for the highest office attempt to make appeals about how they plan to make their lives better.
Yeah. And Megan, to that more broad point about not taking any group for granted, trying to bring everyone into the fold that any campaign possibly can, Trump or Biden. We're seeing the Biden campaign trying to actively go after these Nikki Haley voters who they hope are never Trumpers and willing to come to Biden. It's interesting, when I would talk to them out when I was on the road, not all of them were necessarily saying if it's never Trump and I'll go for Biden. They want to be pursued. They want to be kind of brought into the fold. And to that end, we know they had this call with some of the Biden campaign had this call with some Haley voters. And one person told our reporting team, the messaging has been democracy's on the ballot, democracy's on the ballot. Yeah, we get that, but we're Haley voters. We were supporting her because we believe in policy issues and solutions. We want to talk about substantive issues. What is if that is not the message, democracy's on the ballot, what do you think is the message to these Haley voters?
I think that they need to split the difference here. And I think that, like, to your point, they're not going to leave anybody left unturned and go after everyone. But I do think that they do need to discuss policy. They do need to discuss economics. That's where these voters are. These are middle of the road voters. So these suburban women, they need to talk about their reproductive freedoms being taken away. They need to talk about the cost of inflation, or the cost going down, inflation. These are things that the Biden campaign is going to be working to do to get these voters to vote for them, or even give them an opportunity to even think about voting for Biden and not staying home.
Right. And we have a poll of the most important issues. It's a Quinnipiac poll from earlier this month. The most important issues for voters: the economy, number one at 28%, preserving democracy, immigration, and health care. How do you feel like these campaigns are doing in terms of telegraphing these messages? To your point, you're saying that the Trump campaign really needs to be talking about the economy.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like those are the kind of issues that people do want to hear about, right?
They do, but at the same time, immigration is one of those issues that people supposedly want to hear about, and yet, the Democrats, they tried mightily this week with trying to put up an immigration bill, a border security bill. It failed, as we expected it to. I mean, big shock that an immigration bill would fail during an election year after it already failed.
Right.
But that being said, it remains to be seen whether that's even going to be successful. I mean, there were Democrats who voted against this immigration bill in greater numbers than when it happened several months ago. So is that really going to be a winning strategy? Point being, are the Democrats, are they on the right path with strategy right now? And I think that's a big question even within Democratic circles as to whether they are.